This is Spoon. Hi there, it's me. And this is Spoon's family. Sunday, Spoon visits their grandparent, and they have to be on their best behavior. Goodbye, darling. Goodbye, Granny. At bedtime, Spoon hears stories of Grandma's great adventures of running off with the dish. Wow, Grandma was pretty cool. But lately, Spoon's been feeling blue. What's wrong? Asked their parents. You look a little bent out of shape. Nothing. Just that, I don't know, all of my friends have it better than me. Like the knife, they're so lucky they get to cut and spread, and I never get to cut or spread. Yeah, knife is pretty spiffy. And then there's fork. Fork is so lucky, they get to go practically anywhere, and everybody uses them. They never go stir crazy like me. Fork does get out a lot, and they make themselves very useful, said their parents. By the way, this is from a story called Spoon. I didn't introduce it because I was so excited. If only Spoon knew what his friends were saying at that very same moment. Spoon is so lucky. They're so much fun and easygoing. Everyone's so serious with me. No one's ever allowed to be silly with me. And Spoon, they get to play. People play with spoons. They're always having a good time. Spoon is so lucky. They get to measure stuff. Look at them. No one ever uses me for measuring. And at bedtime, at that bedtime, Spoon's dad turns off the light and touched him and said, "You know, Spoon, I wonder if you realize just how lucky you are. Your friends will never know the joy of diving headfirst into a bowl of ice cream. They'll never know what it's like to clink against the side of a cereal bowl. They'll never be able to twirl around in a mug or relax in a nice cup of tea." Spoon never thought about it that way before. As he laid in his bed, his mind was racing, and he felt so alive. There's only one thing to do. "I can't sleep," says Spoon. The parents say, "Come snuggle." And Spoon comes in, and they spoon. The end. Needless to say, it's a story about how we all have our own special ways of being in the world.
Our reading is from Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul, How to Change the World in Quiet Ways by Dorcas Chang Tozum. Are you listening? What are your mind, heart, body, spirit telling you? When, as a young adult, I first felt that spark of passion to pursue social justice, I remember feeling full of hope, full of excitement, full of ideas and possibilities. Then reality hit. The work was arduous, the impact imperceptible. Some of the people encountered were wonderful, others were decidedly unpleasant. The social issues I wanted to help solve were far more complex and deeply entrenched than I had ever imagined. Over the years, it became increasingly easy to give in to discouragement and to listen to cynicism. I spent far more time wallowing in despair than I care to admit. But I'm just beginning to understand that I spent most of my adult life chasing a version of myself that didn't exist. I wanted so desperately to live up to the activist ideal. At some points in my life, I think I would have sacrificed almost anything to be become the kind of fearless, decisive, confident, social justice leader that I had always envisioned. Yet, in sacrificing my authentic self with all my gifts and limitations, my strengths and my challenges, I also hurt my ability to contribute meaningfully to causes. For those of us committed to this road of social justice for the long run, we need to trade our well-intentioned but misguided idealism for cohesive and authentic integrity. Who you are is who you live as. Your choices and actions are consistent with your characteristics, interests, gifts, traits, skills, and sensitivities.
Here's the cover of the book. I am going to lend it to a friend, but if people want it afterwards, I'm happy to share it. Cheng Tozin says, for those of us committed to this road of social justice for the long run, we need to trade our well-intended but misguided idealism for a cohesive and authentic integrity. Who you are is who you live as. Your choices and actions are consistent with your characteristics, interests, gifts, traits, skills, and sensitivities. So it starts with me. It starts with you. She continues, who are you really? And are you willing to embrace the person, to nurture that person, to value their well-being as much as you do another's? For it is in health, in groundedness, in authenticity, in gratitude, and yes, even in joy, that we can be the most effective agent for positive social change. When we're doing what we were meant to do with the best of what we have, we can experience a deep sense of righteousness, of soul contentment. Dorcas Chen Tozin told a story about the genesis of this book with an interview online, and she said that her publisher had contacted her during the pandemic to see if she had any books in the works. It happens to all of us, doesn't it? She had replied no. Previously, she had written one book on her husband's social entrepreneur company called D.Light, which brought solar products to over 100 million people. The book explores how socially minded businesses can transform the world. And then she wrote another book, perhaps reflecting her life, on how to love an entrepreneur. In her own life, she held several positions in nonprofits over many years, and she found herself profoundly burned out and depressed. After telling her publisher no, she went on a long walk with her dog, and she talks about how it was at a time where there was rising anti-Asian hate crimes. It was the time of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. They had all been killed, and it was a time of a lot of pain and suffering. As she walked, she reflected on how deeply she cared and how she wanted to engage. She reflected on how she had tried so many ways to engage, and yet she thought, I can't seem to do it in a way that is healthy and balanced. It was during that walk that the title of the book came to her, Social Justice for the Sensitive Soul, How to Change the World in Quiet Ways. She found that she had come to know activism as frontline activism, activism that happens in loud or large crowds led by charismatic leaders, demanding that she give her part of herself as if it was a personal sacrifice. I would say the book was her way to wrestle with who she was at her core and to offer a mirror or a window to those of us who may feel the same. So who are these sensitive souls? Her list includes anyone who identifies as sensitive, empathic, quiet, introverted, or melancholic. Her premise is that these fall into three main groups: the highly sensitive, the highly empathic, and the highly introverted. So let's just go a tad bit deeper. The highly sensitive have sensory processing sensitivity or high environmental sensitivity. So these sensitivities actually impact the nervous system and cognitive processes. She describes highly sensitives as tending towards shifting emotions, anxiety, and being withdrawn. And according to research, this is about 20% of the population. Then she goes on to describe highly empathic people who are described as feeling and absorbing other people's emotions or physical symptoms, and they may also intuit energy in the surrounding environment. Many empathics also actually can feel sort of the energy of nature and the world outside of the human experience. And finally, we have the group that makes up about half of our population, the introverts. Introverts are people who enjoy and need solitude. She notes that even though introverts can enjoy being with other people, they need to have their time alone. So since we are people and not categories, we're not spoons, we're not knives, we're not forks, we're people. Often we identify with more than one of these. Some people identify with all of them. So I'm just curious about, when I look at those of you online and those of you here, I won't ask each group to identify themselves, but I'm wondering how many of you feel a connection with one of those type of people I just spoke about? All right, it's a pretty big number out there. We're a congregation that year after year talks about wanting to be more involved in social justice. Newcomers are attracted to our faith because social action is part of our call, and the new Unitarian Universalist Article 2 language expresses our values and says this about justice. We work to be a diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. As we've talked many a times, and Chad has, and many of you have from this pulpit, we live an active faith, a lived faith. MSUS has a mission and a vision that highlights that we want to work for a flourishing world with courageous love. So what does that look like when we realize that a congregation is made up of individuals who all come with their own sensitivities, lived experiences, dreams, and emotions? Feels like we're forever trying to right-size our dreams and expectations in order to move forward with more involvement and impact on our justice work. Today, I don't have any answers or solutions, but my hope is that it can help us understand perhaps where we get tripped up, what might hold us back, and to encourage you and us to keep moving forward in a way that will create a flourishing world in the beloved community we dream of. So this internal landscape that we all live in can often work against our desire to do more in the world of justice making. I don't know about you guys, but I was definitely raised with an idealism and a romanticism when I understood social change, fueled by the history of the civil rights, of Stonewall, of disability rights, of women's rights movements. I was taught about heroes and movements and moments of history that took a turn for the better. Cheng Tozin confesses, somewhere along the way I developed a clear picture in my mind of who I had to be in order to be an effective change agent. I wanted to be an unflinching advocate for the marginalized and suffering. I wanted to be an unceasing voice calling for change loudly, compellingly, and articulately. I wanted to challenge powerful people, bring down unjust systems, and break cycles of poverty, violence, and corruption. Who doesn't want that? I want that. There's a risk with holding such an image, such an idea of social justice agents, though. As I mentioned, after devoting herself to good causes for a period of time, she ended up having a breakdown. She said, I spent years trying to be the idealized version of myself, working long hours, pushing myself into challenging roles, never saying no, and regularly placing myself in contexts that petrified me. And when my body communicated stress, I ignored it. I didn't listen to my heart when it ached from pain, sorrow, and exhaustion. Her story is an extreme example, but I found that she struck a chord in me when it came to how I talk to myself internally about social justice and who I compare myself to. So I'm curious about if all of you have any image or stereotype that you wrestle with when it comes to this image of activists or people who are changing the world or people who are in social justice movements. And if you do, if you would say them or type them in the chat and I'll repeat them in the microphone when you kind of think about what's your stereotype of a social justice agent Anybody have one in mind? Yeah, Gandhi. That's a good one. Yeah.
Are you talking about characteristics?
Yeah, characteristics, kind of. Bold. Yeah. Gandhi. It can be a people too. Loud. Kathy Burrick. No, I know you mean it seriously, so I understand that. Anybody online have something they want to type in chat? Nope, they're being quiet. Fearless. Charismatic. Gloria Steinem. Yep. Martin Luther King. Yeah. A listener. And a speaker.
And never stopping.
Never stopping, tireless. Can just keep going day after day after day. Never wearing down. Energizer Bunny. So, what I find when I compare myself to someone I am not, or even at 61 to someone I used to be, I can be pulled down by self-judgment. The tapes in my head hold me back because they are so black or white, all in or all out. She, the author of this book, calls that the activist ideal. And I see it as myself getting in the way of my own social justice work. Internal tapes like this. You can only help by knocking on doors or making phone calls, and I can't do it, so. Or I have to be able to talk about injustice with facts in hand, and if I can't do it, I have no right to speak at all. Or if I volunteer to do something small, they're going to ask me to do something big, and I don't want to have to say no. Any of you have tapes like this in your mind? I see a couple nodding heads. Yep. Do you think they get in your way of further social justice? Yep, a couple nods right there. For some reason, when we don't live up to some ideas of activism that we'd like to, we struggle with activist guilt, feeling guilty about not doing enough. I know I certainly suffer from this more than I care to admit. When Jen and I were working on this service, we had discussions about language, and we thought perhaps if we could use something like engaged citizens instead of activist, it might open a different door for us. Or if we could view our lives in a sense, a series of smaller actions that impact democracy, our culture, our families, our friends, our communities, and impact injustice. We've talked about it a lot of times, how this period of time just feels like a fire hose amount of daily information about what's happening locally in other cities and states and countries. We had another shooting this week. It's been a lot to hold. And I think it really compounds the likelihood of us feeling overwhelmed. Sensitive souls, says Cheng Tozin, have a more limited tolerance for stress and stimulation. They have a tendency towards melancholy and are weighed down by what they absorb. She says many things can begin to feel like just too much stress, too much noise, too much pressure, too much pain, too much conflict. She also talks about how we are living in a time where anger is normalized. Experts have even called it the age of anger. But anger, says Cheng Tozin, is a blunt forced instrument which creates an us and them. And needless to say, the them is always demonized. Brene Brown cites spirituality as a center part of our understanding of being interconnected, of breaking down that us and them. Brown says that practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective and meaning and purpose into our lives. Those of us who have committed ourselves to a faith community like MSUS, we are consciously seeking ways to be in the world with loving kindness, to try to be our best selves, and to examine ourselves and our faith so that we can have a higher level of inner peace and clarity. Yes, we feel anger and outrage at the injustices around us. We live in a polarized world where it feels like confrontation is winning. We continue to address change, but as we address change, we kind of tend to lean more into calling people in versus calling them out. seeking commonality and the sacredness of each being, even when it's tempting to do the absolute opposite. We need to fight evil systems and policies, unjust acts, instead of focusing too much on individual people, and we need to take care of ourselves along the way so we can sustain healthy lives. During my social justice leadership class this Friday, we started with a check-in. These are all people who are committed to social justice, usually in congregations, but also in interfaith groups. The first question was, what are you doing about self-care? What are you doing for self-care? And I've talked about my own self-care. I've added a new one that I super-de-duper love, which is I have a cappuccino maker. I make my coffee, I broth my milk, sprinkle a little chocolate on top, and I go sit in a room in a comfortable chair. I drink my coffee, and I breathe, and I do a guided imagery. I also started recently doing morning pages. I don't know if you guys know Julia Cameron. She wrote The Artist's Way, and you sit down every morning and you write 3 pages. Kind of tedious, but it's so interesting what happens during that time. So that's a new practice that I've started. I know that in order to be my best self, I need to tend to my inner spirit. Groundedness, sometimes hard-won groundedness, cannot be overrated. So if you're feeling yourself ungrounded, I encourage you to lean into something. Try something new or return to something old. There's no perfect. You can just give it a go. Like in so many circumstances in our lives, we need to understand our own inner landscape to honestly look at our own gifts and our limitations, along with assessing what our primary interests and passions are. Chang Tozin says, you don't need to know exactly what your role should be in the world of social justice in order to engage. Or if you thought you knew, it's okay to change your mind. Most of your fellow activists haven't figured it out anyway. But you can feel your way forward, bit by bit, opportunity by new opportunity. We can return to the well-known statement, which I've always loved by Howard Thurman, which is, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do it, because that's what the world needs, is more people who have come alive. Many of you highly sensitive souls have found ways to stay engaged and to push the dial towards greater justice. Carol Whitman, she's talked of her practice of writing letters to newspapers and her representatives in government. Carol described how she started writing letters to the editor when she was 20 years old. Now, granted, her dad was in journalism as well, so she has a little bit of skill, but one need not have all that skill. She reflects that it was difficult at first because she hadn't had a lot of practice, and it took her a while to learn how to compose each letter. But she did learn how to create concise, to-the-point letters that are often published. Maybe Carol could do a little class for some of us. She also uses an application called ResistBot to write to her congresspeople. She says the app makes it really easy to do that. It provides the format for her. She doesn't have to say a lot. She thinks the staffers who are in congresspeople's offices tabulate how many letters they get on certain topics, which indeed they do. She also said it's nice because then you can share that letter with other people and they can submit it as well. She said it's easy to go to your senators and congresspersons' websites and contact them that way as well, or just send it in a regular mail. From the comfort of her own home, in her own introverted way, Carol has continued this practice, and she says, I feel like writing letters multiplies my personal power to push issues forward. It's not just me writing one letter, it's maybe me influencing people through a letter to the editor or helping other people to add their voices by sharing my communication with them. I think of Polly, who engages in social justice work that includes volunteering to serve through our partner SECA, or the other day when she asked if we could provide tents or blankets that she was going to drop off at one of the tent cities. Her practice, as I observe, includes looking for ways to impact the lives of those who are marginalized. She doesn't do it with her pen, but with supplies and her willingness to run supplies to families' cars at SECA's and with her truck. And I spoke to Debbie this week. Debbie describes herself as an empath, and she found ways through her job. One time she was keynoting at an engineering conference, and she had early career women come talk to her about how hard that was. So eventually, she found a training in leanin.org that is 50 ways to fight bias, and she's actually led that in different work environments. She actually led it at the conference, and there were 25 people who attended. Small changes. She said it's a great training and very easy to do. I said, Deb, maybe you can run it for us here. So that's a possibility. She also saw an opportunity last year online, and she went for it. She said she's part of a lot of email lists. There was this play called Enough. Some of you may have gone. They were plays written by young playwrights on gun violence. And she stepped into a producer role. They were done nationally, I think probably imagining it was going to be a little easier than it was. She spoke of parts being really overwhelming, but she asked for help, and she persevered, and it was incredible. She needed a community partner, and I connected her with my friend Melvin Carter, not the mayor, the mayor's father. She's continued to be in conversation with him, and he's put together a film about gun violence that he wants to use in high schools. She's helped raise money for the film. And now she's writing a discussion guide, which involves showing the film, listening to reactions, and thinking through how to guide teachers in high school on how to use this film. I love how Deb reflected on how she uses her creativity for social change. She said, I realize now that creativity isn't about inventing new things. It's about connecting the dots. And her analytic mind and her big heart, she loves to connect those dots. Cheng Tozin dedicates chapters to the many ways that highly sensitive people can contribute to social justice. She describes creatives, record keepers, builders of tangible things, which I know some of you are, equippers, people who are teachers and mentors, and people who like to do research. I believe we all want to create a more just world, and I know personally that I play a lot of mind games with myself about what I should, what I can't. And I do that instead of looking for small opportunities of ways to engage. This past Thursday at our third Thursday gathering, we were talking about hope, and Lori Young was sharing about when she went to DC with her daughter Amy for the Women's March, and then others of us who were around the table talked about being part of the local march. For me, as an extrovert, such events connect me to a spirit of hope, along with providing me a way to express my outrage and my dreams. I've said many times that engaging is a sure way to feel less alone, to connect with others, and to lift your spirits. I encourage you in the months ahead to challenge yourself to find how you can work for greater justice and a flourishing world while respecting if you are a spoon or a knife or a fork. It may be on a personal level. It may be just through connecting with a justice-based, or it may be connecting with a justice-based organization. It may be through leading an effort here at church. For instance, I have heard that Minnetonka has started a postcard writing campaign where they look at different issues and create a postcard each week. Maybe we can tailspin off of that. Like we can look at ways where we can put a little energy and perhaps get some decent effort out of it. You are all big-hearted people. I have seen you give generously. I have seen you think deeply. I have seen you speak eloquently about social justice, and I am aware that there is more that you are involved in that I don't know and others may not know, and for this, I am grateful, and for this, we are grateful. Social justice isn't as narrow as activism. It's broad and it's far-reaching, it's relational, and sometimes it's happening in single conversations where we speak our truth or we share the story about someone we love and in the company of others, and something shifts. Maybe a stereotype is shattered. As Jen expressed this week in our conversation, anytime you are caring about something bigger than yourself, you are doing social justice. It all matters. My hope is that you will keep seeking ways to care for your own sensitive soul and to give part of yourself to a greater cause. May it be so, and amen.